Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto was the owner of a cafe diner. Even the gods and goddesses of Olympus needed a day off. Sometimes they needed time away from the constant bickering and never-ending controversies of their family. On one such day, Wisdom and Moon found themselves discovering a hidden gem within the city that never sleeps, and meeting a familiar blonde knucklehead with a penchant for the color orange. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 11, Part 11. Years ago. Away from Olympus, Hestia could finally hear herself think as she kept her eyes on the dark path ahead of her. Selene's light illuminated her way as she trekked through the undergrowth. The first decade had come and gone since the Olympians had begun their rule over the known world, and as expected, her youngest brother and king of the gods had something big planned for Olympus. All the gods that aligned with Olympus gathered together in the throne room and listened as Zeus decreed a week-long celebration to commemorate their victory over the Titans. The announcement made her roll her eyes good-naturedly, but seeing her siblings excited at the prospect of a week of fun was enough for her to support the decision. It was just a very Zeus decision. The king of the gods loved a good party, though what he loved more was the beautiful nymphs who vied for his attention in their short-length chitons and fluttering eyes. She was sure that was why Zeus threw as many parties and celebrations as he did. He had a weakness when it came to pretty girls, and his wandering eyes and hands were going to get him in trouble one day. She could only hope he and Métis one day tied the knot. She felt Zeus was the kind of man who needed a strong woman to anchor him down and keep him from getting away with everything. Métis was strong-willed and smart. The perfect choice for someone like her youngest brother. Though she wasn't a goddess who frequented many parties and kept to herself most days, the anniversary provided her with the chance to see all her brothers and sisters. Since coming into their domains, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades were rarely in the same room as each other. Hades, since taking over the underworld, rarely came above ground. Her brother didn't talk much about the work he was doing beneath the earth on the few meetings they shared over the decade. All she got was the snippets from her mother. According to her, the underworld had been a mess when Hades took over, and Hades was doing everything he could to overhaul it and bring the creatures that dwelled there to heal. For Poseidon and Zeus, taking control over the sky and the sea was simpler. With Poseidon, reign over the sea was smoothly passed over to Poseidon by their uncle, the eldest of the Titans, Oceanus. The Titan of the sea was the only son of Ouranos and Gaia that refused to aid Cronus in his war against the younger immortals and remained a neutral party. The elder Titan left for deeper sanctuaries within the ocean along with Tethys and many of their children. Since then, Poseidon had built his palace to rival Olympus, to which he dubbed Atlantis. Though she visited only one, Atlantis was a sight to behold. Zeus, on the other hand, had assumed the role of god of the sky in no time, due to the sky having no one to rule over it since the slaying of Ouranos. The sky had remained untouched, with only Helios and Selene to safeguard it until someone assumed power over it. It fitted Zeus to a T and went pleasantly with his dominion over lightning. She feared the kind of fun Zeus could get up there. 2 days into the celebration on Olympus, Hestia decided she needed some much-needed peace. She tried to escape to her temple to get a few hours to herself, but she was rudely interrupted by Demeter and Selene. The Moon Titan and the goddess of the harvest wasted little time in looping their arms through hers and dragging her back to the throne room. Everyone cheered when Hestia got pulled back, making her huff in annoyance at her rotten luck. After much due diligence on her part, she was finally able to slip away unseen and unnoticed when everyone was distracted by the scene of Hera trying to poke Helios full of holes with her spear. The Sun Titan continuously tried and failed to woo the young goddess. The only thing he was successful in was pushing Hera's buttons and causing her infamous temper to spike. For once, she would have to thank the Sun Titan for his efforts, despite him being none the wiser. With Olympus out of her line of sight, she took to the earth and walked with no clear path on her mind. The world was vast, and she had yet to see the wonders that Mother Earth provided them in plenty. After the great shift from Gaia at the end of the Titanomachy, much of the known world had changed. A new world was ready to be explored, with mountains unclimbed and forests untouched. She remembered watching as the world Earth began to change, and she couldn't deny a small part of her was excited at the new prospects she could examine. One day, perhaps she could say with certainty that the goddess of the hearth had walked the earth corner to corner. When would that be? She didn't know. She only had an eternity to find out. She hummed to herself as she walked. Away from Olympus, she trailed the edge of the yet-to-be-named middle continent that rested on Gia's surface. The world had become so different. It was odd to think it was the same one her father once ruled. What's that? There was a soft glow coming from in front of her, 100 meters away by a cliff face. She was familiar with the type of glow cast. Spying shades of orange and yellow, it was clear someone had a fire going. Who could it be? She wondered. She didn't sense the divine aura from her kin. Deciding to investigate, Hestia walked towards the faint glow with trepidation. Though there was no divine aura, that didn't mean she didn't need to have her guard up. There was an abundance of creatures that inhabited the world. Lacking a divine aura didn't squander their potential for being lethal and dangerous. Although she wasn't a fighter like her brothers and sisters, it didn't mean she was defenseless. As the goddess of the hearth, she possessed divine authority over the fire in a way her siblings could only hope to have. It was comparable to Zeus with lightning, or Poseidon with water. Though her two younger brothers possessed a great deal more in terms of power, her advantage was her advanced control and comparison. In a short moment, she was near her target. She stood silent in the brush of some trees, keeping out of sight as a figure sat beside a campfire. The person sat on a log, with his body leaning forward with hands clasped together. His back was facing her, though she could see blonde hair covering his head. It was rather long, with bangs framing his face on both sides and reaching past his chin. He dressed in tattered clothes covered in rips and tears. She frowned. It didn't look like any kind of chitin she'd seen before. She hid behind a tree. She'd never seen this person before. Is he a human? That should be impossible. Humanity, or at least, the first generation of humanity was no more. The golden generation as some referred to them perished in the Great Shift near the end of the war. When the single land mass that made up the world began to shift and change, the gods and titans watched as the world was forced to change. The other pantheons throughout the world, like the Norse and the Egyptians, could do nothing but watch. Despite the history that came with each pantheon, Gia was the first. No matter how hard each pantheon tried to dismiss it, Gia spared no one. Her creations were taken out of the world by the very person that breathed life into them centuries ago. Why it happened, no one knew. Gia had been in a constant state of slumber for centuries, ever since the Titans were given the reins over the kingdom. Her consciousness periodically acted, despite remaining asleep, such as when she shielded Zeus from the Titans and allowed him to grow and attain his strength. The changing of the continent had been without warning, and no one could do anything but get out the way. When Gia chose to alter the world, she did so. The choice belonged to no one but the Earth Mother. To see a survivor after all this time was a surprise. "I know you're there." She almost jumped when she heard the voice. It was low and soft, but she heard it as clear as day. The figure was a he, and he hadn't turned around. His back was still facing her. "I won't hurt you. I just don't like people spying on me," he said again, unclasping his hands and making a motion to the other side of the fire. Another log sat against the earth. If you'd come any later, that log would be getting used as firewood. Unless you prefer to sit on the ground. She didn't move at first. Hesitation lingered on her face, though she did peek out from behind the tree, letting the glow of the fire wash over her face. Extending her hand, the man finally moved when a stream of fire shot through the air and curled into Hestia's palm. It moved and danced between her fingers like water, moving around rocks in a river. She didn't want to come across as hostile since the man next to the fire hadn't done anything to warrant it, but she needed him to know that despite her appearance, she wasn't defenseless. She may have been a pacifist by nature, but that by no means meant she was incapable of protecting herself. Numerous members of the Titan forces could attest to that. "You have fine control over the flames," he replied, with Hestia's getting a good look at the man's blue eyes. "I won't harm you. I have no reason to do so." She detected no hint of deception in his words. Walking out from the woods, she walked across the campsite, her brown eyes keeping watching on him. She felt his gaze on her as she sat on the log, brushing down the fabric across her knees. She saw no weapons visible on his person. "Who are you?" He looked back at the fire, and Hestia could see the reflective glow in his eyes. "No one special," he admitted, "just a man who's grown tired with the world." His eyes were set and tired. He looked like he hadn't got a wink of sleep in days or weeks. "You're from the golden generation, aren't you?" she asked. She tried not to react when he nodded his head. He didn't appear bothered by her statement. "I am." "Very astute of you. How are you still alive? We couldn't sense any living member of the golden generation after the continent broke apart. We assumed you all perished." They searched for as long as they could for any survivors before returning to close off the war. "No. Only I remain," he stated, before adding, "We? You mean your divine brethren?" Again, she didn't show her surprise. "Yes. You know us." "I do," he admitted, "at least, I've heard of you." "The Olympians? The one that fought and defeated the Titans?" Hearing the question in his words, Hestia nodded. "I'm glad your family won. I think most in the world are glad we won. The Titans were responsible for a lot of the world's problems, with my father spearheading them. With them gone, I can only hope my siblings and I can bring about a change for the better." She heard him hum, watched him nod his head before looking her way again. This time she got a good look at his face. He was still a man in his youth in appearance, with the strangest markings on his cheeks. They reminded her of the whiskers from her mother's pair of lions. His hair even resembled a mane like one too. She remembered observing members of the golden generation in the early days of her release from her father's stomach. She'd been so curious to discover more about the world they lived that she spent weeks just watching and learning. The mortals in the world were bizarre and wore clothing vastly different from their own. He didn't seem dangerous. Admittedly, looks could be deceiving. Looking at Hera and Demeter, one would not think the two were warriors until you saw Demeter wield a sword and Hera a spear. Many of their foes made the mistake of looking down on them and paid the price. "Well, I wish you luck. Hopefully, you'll do better than your predecessors." "I hope that too." She could only hope Zeus didn't fall the same way Cronus did. Their father didn't raise the bar to a high standard. "So, what brings one such as yourself out to the middle of nowhere?" "Taking some time to myself. I love my siblings, but they can be a bit much sometimes. Zeus and Poseidon, in particular, could be very loud and boisterous. Hades could be very glum, and it tended to be infectious. Hera had a temper, and Demeter was very clingy. Each one had their personality quirk. I enjoy the quieter moments." An understanding look appeared on his face. "Well, don't let me keep you. Thank you for stopping to talk with me, even if it was brief. Have a good night," he replied, turning away from Hestia and returning his gaze to the fire. It didn't sound dismissive to Hestia. It was more like he wanted to be left alone, despite Hestia getting the sense he wanted the opposite. "There's no rush." Her words made him look back again. "I only just got here, and I wouldn't mind the company." A lone eyebrow rose. "I thought you wanted to be alone." "I wanted to get away from my family for one night, which I've done. Plus, you look like you could use the company." His expression didn't change from her words. "You don't know me?" "I don't, though we could change that." She said back, "I'm Hestia. Since you know my name, perhaps I could learn yours." He looked at her for a few moments, as if having a silent debate in his mind. "Naruto. My name's Naruto." A pleased look wove onto her face. "It's nice to meet you, Naruto." For the first time since she sat down, the edges of his lips edged up. "You too, Hestia." "Present." Standing in the doorway to the guest room Thalia was sleeping in, Naruto watched as his old friend took a spot on the bed next to the sleeping girl, smoothing down her dress as she sat down. Dressed in casual mortal wear, the goddess of the hearth gently reached over and swept her fingers through Thalia's dark locks. The girl didn't stir. Instead, the warmth coming from Hestia's palm seemed to comfort the little girl, with the goddess watching as she snuggled herself into a tight ball with the covers wrapping around her like a cocoon. A gentle hum came from her throat, and her lips curved into a smile. Thalia was a cute one. Being a former member of the Major 12 Olympians, the eldest daughter of the Titan King had more time than her siblings to watch over the children spawned from her immortal family. Due to her lighter schedule compared to Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, her younger brothers often sought her out and called favors on her to keep an eye on the children with their Ichor running in their veins. Thalia's existence hadn't been a surprise to Hestia. She loved Zeus, but he was too easily led astray from his marriage with Hera. His wandering eyes and hands hadn't settled with growing age, despite being married to one of the most beautiful goddesses in existence. One woman never seemed to be enough for Zeus. The same could be said for her other brothers, though not to the same extreme. Poseidon was much like his younger brother, though he could be picky and didn't try to pick up the first pretty woman that came his way. For Hades, it was companionship to fill the void until Persephone rejoined him in the underworld. A low laugh escaped her lips, gaining Naruto's attention. "What is it?" Hestia shook her head, making the dark curls of her hair bounce in the air. "It's nothing. I've just never seen one of my brother's children have freckles before." "Really? None of the other few hundred kids had freckles. I think it's more like 1,000 when it comes to Zeus." She chirped back, a finger delicately tracing over Thalia's face, "But no. None of them had a splash of freckles across their nose and cheeks before. She has his traditional features, like his blue eyes and dark hair. I can feel the ozone coming off like a vibration in the air. She'll be a strong one if she makes it to adulthood." If. It was a very big if. There was no guarantee any demigod could make it out of their teens, or even their preteen life. As the blonde already knew, monsters were attracted to demigods like a moth to a flame. The moment a demigod with a strong enough aura or the scent entered their senses, they took after them. It was like blood in the water sending a shark into a frenzy. "In the last couple of centuries, I've been keeping an eye on my brother's children from time to time," she told him, "though, it always possible a few slipped through the cracks. Even I have a hard time keeping track of my brother's infidelities." "I remember you saying," he replied, watching with a small smile as Hestia interacted with Thalia. Technically, Hestia was Thalia's aunt and wasn't surprised to find out she had been keeping an eye on her when she could spare it. "You keep an eye on Thalia often." "From time to time. For the most part, little Thalia has been happy enough, though the mother troubled me from the onset." She turned her head, "If Thalia is here, and Beryl is not, that she chose to walk away from her child." "She has," he confirmed, and saw the disappointment and sadness lace through Hestia's features. "Your brother sure knows how to pick them." Beryl showed no remorse or love for her daughter. All she cared about was the fame and riches robbed from her by Thalia's existence. He shook his head in disappointment. "I haven't met such a selfish person like that in some time." Sadly, Beryl Grace is not the first mortal parent to abandon their demigod child, nor will she be the last. "The gods in my family, as well as the goddesses, don't have the best track record when it comes to the mortals they bring to their beds." She returned her gaze to Thalia. She looked so innocent and uncaring of the future that now sat in front of her. All Hestia could do was hope Morpheus was giving the girl pleasant dreams. "She is a cute one." A low laugh came from Naruto. "She is cheeky as well. Sounds like you got to know her today." He shrugged. "Someone had to keep an eye on her today. A monster was following them, but I got rid of it before bringing them here. Didn't think I needed any more complications today." Tucking a strand of Thalia's dark hair away from her face and behind her ear, Hestia quietly stood up from the bed. She made sure the girl was well covered by the sheets, before moving away. "Let's leave her to sleep. I bet today has been a long one for the poor dear." Both Naruto and Hestia left the room, with Naruto silently pulling the door until a 3-inch gap remained. Together, the pair returned downstairs, with the Naruto leading Hestia into the living room. The goddess took the spot on the armchair next to the couch and placed a Seiyushian behind her back. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in her old friend's new home. Despite its size, Naruto had done well at making his home feel welcoming. In particular, Hestia eyed up the fireplace that sat in the center of the wall. The perks of having a friend whose domain was the home. She may have given him a few tips in the past on how to make one's home feel like an extension of themselves. For Naruto home, it was a place that made you feel safe. It perfectly summed the blonde up. Would you like the usual? He asked, standing in the doorway and watching Hestia scanning over the room. Yes, please. And why don't we make use of the fireplace as well? Coming right up. Sitting in peace for 10 minutes while Naruto whipped something up for them, Hestia took the chance to move herself to the floor in front of the fireplace. Conjuring a blanket, Hestia tucked her legs to the side while her poker appeared in her hand. Gently, she stoked the flames. It wasn't long before Naruto rejoined her, carrying a small tray in his hands. You've made yourself at home, he commented, lowering himself down until he was sitting on his backside with his legs tucked against him. He picked up a teacup and saucer and guided it over to Hestia, who happily took it from him, your usual. 1 apple and elderberry tea with a tiny splash of honey. Thank you. Bringing the drink up to her mouth, Hestia sighed in delight at the fruit punch that hit her sense of taste. Delicious. I see your tea-making skills are still up to par. Well, when you live in Japan for as long as I did, making tea becomes a required skill. People think Brits drinks a lot of tea. They've never been to Japan and visited a tea ceremony. He spent a long time in the East, in particular, Japan. Japanese culture was the one that resembled his old home the most, and being around their towns and cities in the early days helped him to feel like he gained it back in a small way. Plus, Hinata would never forgive me if I forgot all her lessons in tea making. The s'mores. A snort broke from Naruto, before lifting the plate of s'mores from the tray and handing them over to Hestia. They weren't anything fancy, but they would do. All you needed was graham crackers, marshmallows and some chocolate, and in return, you'd have a very pleased hearth goddess. Watching her conjure a small poker like the one she created earlier, she stuck 2 s'mores on the end of each and handed one over to the blonde. You have a lovely home, Hestia told him, as the pair held their sweet treats over the flames. I'm sorry I haven't come to visit you sooner. I was planning to visit during the first months, but things at home got in the way. That's okay. I had a feeling you'd come calling at some point, so I kept an eye out for you most days. He let out a low chuckle. I had a feeling that members of your family would visit the den at some point since I'm in New York, but I didn't think some of them would become some of my best customers. Smiling, Hestia replied, I hear Artemis and Athena have both become regulars, and visit you nearly every week. Oh yeah. Athena is easy to cater to. Artemis though, he muttered, before letting out another low chuckle, that stomach of her doesn't seem to have a bottom. She's like me when it comes to ramen, and I know how challenging I could be with my appetite. They always rave about you. It was surprising to hear my 2 nieces complimenting a mortal man of all things. Athena is one thing, but Artemis is another. Her mouth formed into a smirk. I hear you've gained Aphrodite's attention as well. A groan escaped from his lips. Don't start with that. That woman. He muttered, his head drooping. I've been alive a long time, Hestia, and I've never met someone who's so blatant about those kinds of desires. She might as well just hold up a sign that says, hey. Come over here and do me. A finger flicked his ear, causing him to wince. Don't be so crass. The goddess had never been one for rude language. The blonde blew a raspberry Hestia's way. I don't hear you disagreeing. Aphrodite has always been a bit of a character, even by Olympian standards. That doesn't make her any less a friend and a member of my family. I still don't hear you saying otherwise. Hestia huffed, and rotated her s'more over the fire. She can be a handful, and that's all I'm saying. A handful? Yeah, I guess that's one way of putting it. He brought up his drink, taking a good long swig of the hot substance before following up with, then there's that nephew of yours, and the little show he was putting on in my restrooms. He heard a sigh from the goddess. Let me guess. Apollo. That boy is as bad as his father. Worse at times. He's Zeus's son all right. Never any doubt about that. Hestia commented. She heard about Apollo's little incident from the Olympian gossip grapevine. Nymphs could be the worst gossips, and when the goddess of love was involved, then nothing stayed a secret for long. No matter where in the world an embarrassing event took place, it always ended up coming back to Olympus. Hephaestus had even made a side hobby with Olympus TV. His cameras were everywhere, ready and waiting. Naruto hummed in amusement. I wonder when he'll be popping in for a visit. Oh, I don't think you'll see him anytime soon. She admitted, her eyes flickering between brown eyes and flames. Hephaestus prefers to keep to himself. He's never been a sociable person the same way his brothers are. I think that's why most of the goddesses in my family prefer to be around him than the likes of Apollo, or Ares. Everyone except Aphrodite, Naruto commented. Everyone except Aphrodite, Hestia confirmed, before giving him a funny look. Strange, how we looped back around to her. Hey, you brought her up. Naruto held up his hands, before letting out a low chuckle. It wasn't long before Hestia was chuckling along with him. It's good to see you again, Hestia. It's good to see you too, my old friend. She replied, looking at Naruto fondly. Their friendship spanned millennia. It could have been the longest-lasting friendship in history for all they knew. For Hestia, Naruto provided her with a reprieve from the family she cherished so much. When she needed time away, she visited him in whatever land he chose to make his temporary home. She would stay for a few weeks, sometimes even months, catching up and going off on little adventures of their own. As she quickly came to realize, Naruto had this uncanny ability to draw the most peculiar people towards him, akin to a magnet. Oh, the people they met, and the things they saw would make her siblings green with envy. He was an escape, and one of the few from outside of her family that she cherished dearly. For Naruto, it was the friend he needed during the most agonizing time in his life. Without Hestia by his side, he wouldn't have been able to escape the hole of loneliness and despair he found himself trapped within. You've found yourself in quite the predicament. I'd say I'm surprised, but we both know I'd be lying. Yeah, it's been a crazy day, Naruto confirmed, taking his s'more out of the fire and gently blowing on it. I didn't think when I woke up this morning, I'd be housing an abandoned demigod. Said demigod also happens to be your niece and your brother's daughter. A serious look crossed Naruto's face. Tell it to me straight, Hestia. What options does Thalia have? Hestia mimicked his actions with her own s'more, gently cooling it down with her breath. At this moment in time, she started, taking a small bite from her s'more and licking the corners of her lips. She has 3 options that I can see. 3? All right, then let's hear them. The first option is the least likely to work, so let's get it out of the way. The first choice is to take Thalia back to her mother in California. She watched as Naruto's face morphed into a grimace. I can see you don't favor that idea. Not in the slightest. If Thalia gets sent back to Beryl, it will only spur her to do it again. Next time, she could get left with someone who wants to harm Thalia, rather than help her. It was luck Beryl and Thalia stumbled into the fox's den. Any other establishment would have called Child Protective Services, and Thalia would have found herself in the foster system where anyone could get to her. She'd be a target for monsters, inhuman, and human. I think we'll pass on option 1. Agreed. Option 2. Well, it's more favorable, though it still has concerns. I contact Chiron and inform him I'm bringing Thalia to Camp Half-Blood. The likelihood of Thalia joining the camp has always been high since her birth, though not until she was older. Kids as young as Thalia don't typically go there unless there's no other choice. Kids who have no homes, and have been abandoned by their parents, much like the situation she's currently in. Naruto nodded, taking a bite from his s'more. Camp Half-Blood. Of course, he was aware of the existence of the camp. Located on Long Island, Camp Half-Blood was one of the few places in the world that acted as a haven for the demigods. Somewhere where they didn't need to look over their shoulders every 5 minutes, and where they could meet people like themselves and build real relationships. He'd never seen it, but Hestia told him a few stories about some of the people that went there. He met a fair few of them as well, though none were aware of his real identity. Frederick Bartholdi, Harriet Tubman, Amelia Earhart, William Shakespeare. Just to name a few. It was a place where kids like Thalia could learn to control whatever gifts they inherited from their godly parent, and learn how to fight. If he was honest with himself, though Camp Half-Blood sounded ideal, he didn't like the idea of children as young as Thalia learning how to wield a sword and fight monsters. The people of today weren't like the people from past cultures. They certainly weren't like the people of his era. The two were like night and day. Teaching children to fight and kill at such a young age could have harmful consequences on how said children grew up in the world. You only had to look at Kakashi, or Itachi, to see the lasting effect it had on them. There was a reason Old Man Third Hokage ensured no genin left the ninja academy any younger than 12 after the events of the Uchiha massacre. Children that young shouldn't have to worry about wielding a sword. They shouldn't have to go to bed feeling pleased that they managed to survive one more day, before turning fearful about what the next day might bring. Camp Half-Blood, though it would be a place Thalia would eventually have to visit when she inevitably embraced her heritage, didn't feel like the right fit for someone barely out of diapers. It's better than the first option, though she's a bit young to learn how to kill monsters, he mumbled before asking, what's the third option? Finishing another bite from her s'more, Hestia fluttered her eyelashes, are you sure you want to hear it? Naruto gave her a look, fine, fine. The third option is she stays here with you. You raise her, protect her, and teach her how to defend herself when the time comes. Oh? Is that all? Naruto feigned surprise, you don't ask for much, do you? It's not like you haven't done it before. That was a long time ago. He replied, looking away. A pretty little blonde girl with big blue eyes flashed across his mind. She was a cute little thing, though she didn't stay that way. She grew up and became a formidable warrior in her own right. She was more likely to run a spear through you if you earned her ire, 500 years ago. Not to mention, she wasn't even a demigod from the Greek pantheon. She was from the Norse. I know you guys don't like to mingle. He waved his hands in the air. A demigod's a demigod, no matter where they're from. Just like monsters are still monsters, no matter what form they take, Hestia reminded him, what was her name again? Naruto turned his head her way, Gunilla. Yes, Hestia nodded, I remember. She was a cute one if I remember right, and a daughter of thunder, much like Thalia is. Thor was never more annoying than he was while Gunilla was under my care. He used visiting her as an excuse to pick a fight. Naruto sighed and fell backwards until he was looking up at the ceiling. Could he look after another demigod again? I don't know Hestia. Hestia giggled, and soon found herself staring up at the ceiling with her blonde best friend, would it be that bad? I don't know. Maybe. His thoughts turned to all the times his customers would visit the Fox's Den with their kids. They gravitated to him, and vice versa. He would pull silly faces at them, and make them food that wasn't even on the menu if it's what they wanted. It never bothered the parents, simply cause it was keeping the kids happy. He liked to think it all stemmed back to him being a father. He loved being a father when Boruto and Himawari were born, despite how terrifying it was. When he took Gunilla in, it was because he saw a little girl who needed love and attention. He treated her like she was his own. It helped that he got on with her godly father, despite his unnatural love for fighting and causing a mess. However, another reason was that he didn't want children growing up the same way he did. Alone and without a family by your side, I made it a point not to reveal myself to the world unless necessary. I keep myself to myself because it's easier that way. Meeting you had been a happy accident, one that I'll never regret. Meeting Norse gods were the same, despite some of them trying to poke me full of holes. He sighed and rested the back of his head on the carpet. I'm tired, Hestia. I miss home. I miss my family. I shouldn't be here. His words came out as a whisper, but Hestia had heard him. Reaching over with a free hand, she wove her fingers through his and gave it a reassuring squeeze. She pops up every now again, you know. More so recently, since I moved to New York. She has this habit of appearing in my mind whenever things seem to be going well. Do you think she's waking up? A lace of fear etched into Hestia's voice. To her relief, Naruto shook his head. He shook his head, she stirs from time to time, but not since the 1940s have I felt it. I'd know if she's awake. He put down the rod holding the half-eaten s'more and patted his chest, I'd feel it if I did. That woman and I have linked thanks to the curse she put on me. Many would see immortality as a gift. She didn't intend it to be a gift. She never did. His gaze hardened up at the ceiling, I wouldn't give her what she wanted, so she took everything from me. He turned and looked at Hestia, his eyes shifting from anger into sadness. Taking Gunilla into my care was one thing. When she died, Odin turned her into a Valkyrie. When Thalia dies, she goes to the underworld, and I never see her again. I'm inviting more pain into my life, and there's enough in there as it is. Hestia rolled onto her side. True, but would you turn away a child in need of help? That's not the Naruto I know. Despite his words, Hestia knew her friend too well. He wore his heart on his sleeve. He couldn't help himself when it came to helping people. It was like he was hardwired that way. Something inside him wouldn't allow him to walk away from a situation where he could make a difference. Somewhere he could turn a negative into a positive. I think that's what people used to call my hero complex. I can't help but meddle, even when everyone else avoids it. He shook his head and laughed to himself. A good quality to have. Shame more people don't have it. I guess. He let out another sigh, before pushing himself back into a sitting position. Hestia quickly joined him, watching as the cogs in his mind started turning. She could tell he was always pondering over the idea. Letting it sink in, picturing the potential outcomes of letting a demigod of Thalia's caliber remain with him. I'd have to come public to your family if I do this. He said, to your brother at the very least. He should know where she is, even if he doesn't pay her the attention he should. He didn't need another thunder god trying to pick a fight with him. One was enough. Zeus shouldn't be an issue. Despite his reputation when it comes to his daughters, he does develop soft spots for them, Hestia revealed, thinking on all the times Zeus coddled and spoiled Artemis and Athena when they were young goddesses. Luckily, next month is June. Zeus will be celebrating his anniversary to Hera, which will put him in a positive mood. How positive? So positive that it's the only time in the year that the gods can request practically anything from him within reason, and he'll say yes. It was hilarious to watch, and Hestia found herself in a fit of giggles whenever she saw the queue of immortals lining up outside of Zeus's temple. Taking the virginity of his beautiful and faithful wife every year thanks to Hera's sacred bath within her temple always put a spring in his step. Once she saw him dancing along the streets of Olympus because he was in such a good mood. There's no better time. I'll bring him to the Fox's Den in June. I'll let you know the date beforehand. He ran a hand over his face, and pinched the bridge of his nose. One little detail I think you're missing. Oh. Your sister. A knowing look ran over his face as he stared at Hestia. Could she become a problem in the future? The stories around Hera and the demigod children of her husband were infamous. Any child born from the union between the king of the gods and a mortal woman would find themselves at the mercy of the enraged queen, and their lives rarely ended on a positive note. My sister is aware of Thalia's existence. So far she's left her alone. Whether that's because Zeus threatened action if Hera tried anything, or she's playing the long game, I can't say. Hestia explained, in the past, her decisions towards Zeus's demigod children have been the result of spontaneous decision-making. Hera's dream is to have the perfect family, and children of Zeus that don't come from her ruin that image. It took her a long time to accept Zeus's Olympian children since they weren't going anywhere. Since demigods have mortal lifespans, actions against them only have temporary consequences. She never agreed with her sister's actions in the past. Though she could understand Hera felt betrayed, and it was never easy to watch your sister's heart break over and over again by constant infidelity. Her actions towards demigods couldn't be justified in her eyes. Zeus was the one at fault, not the child. If Hera wanted to take her anger out on someone, then it should have been her husband. However, as would always happen, Hera would kick him out of their marriage bed for a while, but Zeus would sweet-talk his way back into Hera's good graces. It was a cycle that continued for millennia, and knowing them as she did, it wasn't going to stop anytime soon. It was the definition of a dysfunctional marriage. It was no wonder the aspect of it became riddled with divorce. How could the domain thrive when the goddess who watched over it was in a one-sided marriage of their own? Naruto let out a low hum and sensed the aura of the little girl sleeping upstairs. So innocent and small. What are you thinking? Hestia asked, recognizing the look on his face. He was in deep thought, his fingers tapping against his knee. It was a little sign she picked up over the years when he was thinking about something. His fingers couldn't keep still. I understand why your sister acts out, he replied, garnering Hestia's attention. I think we all would be if we married to him. She's angry and frustrated. She's at the end of her rope, as it were. I remember you saying a long time ago that she wanted nothing more than the picture-perfect family. No offense to your sister, but she's not going to have that with Zeus. Many of us have told her, but she chooses to ignore our advice. Hera was incredibly stubborn, and her temper could go unmatched when pushed the wrong way. Even Zeus was hesitant to deal with his wife when she was angry beyond words. Since marriage is her domain, she doesn't take advice well on the subject. The blonde nodded. I sympathize with her, but that's no excuse to take that frustration out on children, even if they're her unfaithful husband's children. Adults harming children didn't sit well with him. Gods and goddesses who thought they could mess with children, they would have a rude awakening with him around. I'll make this blunt, Hestia. He confident look appeared on his face. Whether it's your sister, or someone else. I pity any god from any pantheon that comes to my doorstep looking to pick a fight. Whether it's with me, or it's with Thalia. They'll be on a one-way trip to whatever version of hell you gods have. So, does that mean the girl can stay? Hestia asked, sounding hopeful. With a tired nod, Naruto agreed, yeah, I guess she can stay. As you said, it's her best option. Hestia clapped her hands together. Wonderful news. I think this is the best alternative. She didn't need to wonder if Thalia was going to be happy here. She knew in her heart that Naruto would provide a warm and loving home for her little niece. He might be rusty when it comes to raising a child as young as Thalia, but if anyone could manage, it was him. Children of Zeus could be notoriously hard to raise, and often inherited some of her brother's less than desirable traits. However, those children didn't have a knucklehead like Naruto raising them. She was sure as Thalia grew up, she'd realize there was little she could get away with. Don't think you're getting out this scot-free, Naruto replied, and watched Hestia freeze mid-clap. If you think I'm doing this alone, then you've got another thing coming. She wasn't sure she was going to like this. What do you mean? I'll look after Thalia on one condition. He held up a finger. What's the condition? She asked, looking at him suspiciously. He leaned in, a tired grin forming on his face. You have to help me raise her. I think it's time Thalia got to know her wonderful auntie Hestia. What? Hestia gasped, looking like someone who stuck their finger in a plug socket. What do you mean? I can't do that. Sure, you can. It's easy. I mean, you've seen your sisters raise their kids, so you know what not to do. He shrugged and stood up. You can't tell me you've never wondered what it would be like to raise a child of your own. You know I haven't. Hestia stood up and scowled at him. She would have appeared threatening if her cheeks didn't puff up when she got mad. She looked like an angry chipmunk who had her nuts stolen from her. I swore I would never have children of my own. I'm not maternal. I don't have that vibe. That vibe. Naruto snorted. You know what I mean. Technically, you're not having kids in the traditional sense. You're merely helping me raise Thalia. He said again, I'm not asking you to do the whole mom act. I'm saying be her auntie Hestia, and build a relationship with her. Thalia should have a female presence in her life, and who better than Miss Goody Two-Shoes, Hestia. We're not supposed to be present in the lives of demigod children. He shrugged, your brother wasn't supposed to have any more demigods. Look how well that turned out. Besides, when was the last time you bent the rules a little? I don't bend any rules. He snorted. What was that for? A hand came up to his mouth, and he coughed out, 1969. Hestia's eyes went wide, and pointed the finger at him again. You promised we would not talk about that. I recall we were at Woodstock. I'm warning you. I still remember the smile on your face as you crowd surfed from one corner to the other. The who were performing, he grinned, before feeling a weight jump on his back and a small fist begin bopping him on the head. Ow. You crazy goddess. Get off. You said you would never mention that day again. My fingers were crossed. Gah. His yelps soon turned into chuckles. Eventually, he was able to slide the annoyed goddess off his back and placed her back on her 2 feet. She looked less than happy, but he knew she wouldn't do anything to hurt him. It wasn't Hestia's nature to hurt. It was her nature to soothe. Come on, Hestia. His voice turned low. I'm not asking you to make this girl your daughter, or anything like that. All I'm asking is for you to be a positive female presence in her life. I dread to think about what kind of presence Beryl had in her young life. His hand came up and rested on her shoulder. If it was anyone else, Hestia's might have scolded their palm. Just be the cool aunt I know you can be. A good influence. His eyes softened, for me. Now it was Hestia's turn to soften. It took a few moments, but when her shoulders dropped, he knew he had her. It wasn't like Hestia to turn away from someone who needed help. They were much the same in that regard. Naruto rarely asked for favors, and Hades knew, the blonde had helped her out a time or two. It wasn't like she was going to be solely responsible for the girl. She would be helping out and being the cool aunt, as the blonde stated. She sighed. Fine. Really? Yes, yes. For you, Naruto. Only for you. In typical Naruto fashion, Hestia found herself swept up in a tight hug, breaking her annoyed visage and turned her expression back into a smile. Have I ever told you you're amazing, Hestia? Oh, once or twice, though it never hurts to hear it. She patted him on the back. Come on, we don't want our drinks getting cold. I still have room left for another s'more, or two. Of course. You can have all the s'mores you like. Hestia giggled, I'll hold you to that. Chapter 12, Part 12. Underworld. Come on. We need to head back before your father begins to notice our absence, Hecate replied, halting and turning around to look at Melino. The goddess of ghosts was stood in the middle of the path, watching as the gates that housed the old ones came to close. Melino. Are you listening? I know. Her reply came out as little more than a whisper. I'm just wrapping my head around everything that happened today. It's a lot to take in. The amount of information she received about the mysterious blonde was overwhelming. On the one hand, she was grateful she was able to speak to the people that knew him best. His wife. His children. His parents. Everyone who could tell him about the different aspects of his life. The ups and the down. His childhood, which led into his teenage years, and then into adulthood. She felt she might know the man better than himself. His parents couldn't help much given they died young and on the day he was born, but his wife, Hinata, had been a treasure trove of knowledge. They were understandably suspicious at first, but steadily opened up when they realized she meant no ill will to them or Naruto. Jiraiya, despite his initial friendliness, and the woman with the giant melons hadn't spoken much. Most of the time they watched and listened, their gaze locked on the pair of goddesses like a homing beacon. Tsunade had pitched in when needed, and Melino couldn't help but feel the maternal worry that came off the blonde woman. Given Kushina had died the day Naruto was born, Melino would hazard a guess that Tsunade had taken it upon herself to play the maternal role in his life. She mentioned how she once had to tie him to a chair and ordered a woman named Shizune to force-feed steamed vegetables into his mouth. When she punched her fist into her other hand, both goddesses had the feeling Tsunade was the kind of a person who enjoyed tough love. What will you do now? Melino sighed and scratched the back of her head. What should she do now? There was an immortal from the Golden Generation waking amongst modern society, and the gods had no idea he existed. For something to go amiss from her extended family on Olympus, and remain out of the sight from the gaze of Zeus was laughable. Her father's brother was suspicious of anything that didn't belong, especially when they had power. Whether he had power along with his immortality was a question mark. This power called chakra that the old souls could wield sounded like something out of a storybook, and yet the way they described it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Mortals who could use that type of power felt wrong. Like the everyday person wouldn't be able to handle having that kind of power at their disposal. It was no wonder the old souls lived in a time of constant bloodshed and espionage, where nations and people were overflowing with hubris and greed. If people of today could use chakra, then she could picture the wrathful Earth Mother awaking from her slumber to punish humanity once again. I don't know, Melino muttered. She turned around and caught up with Hecate. Instead of waking along the olden path again, the bodies of the two goddesses began to light up. In the blink of an eye, the pair disappeared from the gates and reappeared within the palace of Hades. They stood in Melino's quarters, with Hecate watching as Melino sundered over to the foot of her bed and promptly dropped herself on top of it with all the grace of a newborn duckling. I should tell my father. That wasn't surprising. Given all but one of the old souls were within his realm, the god of the underworld would want to know how one of the old ones wasn't claimed by his domain. And what do you think Hades will do? Hecate asked. It's hard to say. There's still a couple of months until Mother comes home, so his mood will be gloomy at best. The queen of the underworld was one of the few people who could bring Hades out his shell, and bring down the iron walls Hades put around himself. She always had the most success, followed closely by the mother of the elder gods. I'd tell her first before I'd tell Father. She's always been good at cooling down his temper. Hecate hummed, and crossed her arms. Hades has never been the type to act first, and ask questions later. That's always been Zeus, and occasionally, Poseidon. Your father is far more patient than either of them. He waits and watches before deciding if he needs to act. I think you give him far too much credit. I think you don't give him enough. Melino rose an eyebrow. Well then, what do you think I should do with this information? She asked. Despite being the daughter of the god of the underworld, Hecate had known him much longer. She was a good judge of character. It was why she spent so much time in the underworld. I think you should go to Hades, and fill him in on what's happened today. He won't like getting left out of the loop, Hecate replied, pulling a face and tapping her chin. I can't help but wonder what he would do. The goddess of ghosts scoffed and gave a look of disbelief to the older immortal. Seriously. To her surprise, the goddess of magic shrugged. Honestly, it's up to you what you want to do with the information you acquired today. I was along for the ride, and you didn't disappoint. However, I think this is where I'm going to jump off from the train. A sly smirk graced the face of the most mysterious goddess of the Greek pantheon. Melino could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Was she bailing? After making such a fuss earlier in the day. You can't be serious. Hecate had appeared so interested and curious about finding out the secrets of the mysterious blonde, despite having never met him. She could be so flighty at the most unhelpful times. You're leaving? After everything we've heard today. I'm deadly serious. Today was a nice change of pace, but I think I'm ready to go back to my daily routine. You know, being all mysterious and aloof. I have a reputation to uphold after all. Hecate spun around, and Melino could sense the energy building up inside of her. She was about to teleport again but gave Melino one final piece of advice. Don't be a pansy, Melino. Go to your father, and see what happens. Maybe he'll surprise you. Like the mist she controlled, she vanished, leaving Melino alone with her thoughts. I will never understand that woman. She muttered to herself, staring at the spot where Hecate previously stood, before falling back onto the bed. She now had a decision to make. Did she tell her father, or does she continue down the road alone? The goddess of magic wasn't as keen as she began to hope, leaving her wondering if she should have left the mystery of Naruto Uzumaki alone. Was she too far down the rabbit hole? Or was there time to dig her way out? She had a lot of thinking to do. Days later, the fox's den. Telling a little girl that her mother had abandoned her on the doorstep of a stranger was not an experience Naruto looked forward to. He expected plenty of tears and wailing. Maybe some small objects getting thrown his way. There wasn't much a 4-year-old could do to hurt him, except for breaking his tender heart with cuteness. Despite that, in terms of breaking the news to the little girl, he thought the ordeal went rather well all considering. At least, he thought so. It was a boon that Hestia remained with him all through the night, going back and forth on the goings-on in their lives since they last met with one another. Goddesses like Hestia didn't need much sleep compared to mortals, and being a ninja forced himself to adjust to remaining awake during sensitive and urgent missions. You could ill afford to get caught by a rogue ninja whilst asleep. When the clock struck at 9 o'clock in the morning, he chose to coax his new ward out of her bed with the delightful smell of bacon. The greasy food had the desired effect, and not 5 minutes later, a tired and half-asleep Thalia Grace tiptoed into the kitchen. A pillow was still resting in her arms, with half her face obscured as she refused to leave all of the divine warmth of her bed. Both Naruto and Hestia found themselves cooing at the sleepy state of the demigod. How could anyone not at summon image? Good mornings were sent her way, and Naruto soon found himself sat beside little Thalia, with Hestia taking up the other side. Together, they had come up with a story for a Thalia here. One that would ease Thalia into the new life she was about to enter. He told her Beryl had woken up late last night when she was still asleep and asked Naruto to look after Thalia for her before slipping away. That she was unable to look after Thalia anymore and would have to leave her in Naruto's capable hands. There were some half-truths to the story, and he didn't feel it was right to tell her that her mother hated the fact that she was born. That was too cruel to place on someone so young. Some sniffles began to break out as expected, with Naruto placing a comforting hand on the little girl as the information tried to sink in. It was a wonder how much Thalia understood at such a young age. He got down on one knee, and gently wiped her eyes as the skin beneath the eyes turned a blotchy red. Gentle shushing her, and to his mild surprise, he found the little girl shuffling out of her chair and came to rest on his knee, burying her face into his shirt. The looks Hestia gave him was one of amusement at his surprised face before steadily wrapping Thalia up in a comforting hug. He couldn't deny, for a moment, he imagined it was Himawari sitting in his arms, her dark hair tickling the skin beneath his chin. He took a few deep breaths, before gently tilting her head to face his, and gave her the warmest smile he could muster. It had the desired effect, as the little girl gained a twinkle in her eye and the tiniest smile as her new carer shrouded her in love and warmth. Then he introduced her to Hestia. It was safe to say the second they were met, Hestia became Thalia's favorite person in the world. "How's that?" "That's very good, though you've still gone out of the lines a little." "One here," Hestia said, looking over the page in the coloring book she and Thalia were working on together, "and two more down here." She pointed at the bottom of the page, where the bright green and yellow elephant they spent the last 15 minutes coloring in, showing some of the colors going over the black lines. "Ah!" Thalia pouted, her face scrunching up and giving her best attempt at a glare towards the green and yellow elephant. The reaction made Hestia giggled, before placing a comforting hand on the top of her dark hair. "Don't fret, honey. The elephant still looks wonderful. You can't even tell. You have to lean in very close to see it. See?" Proving her point, Hestia leaned into the point where her nose was touching the surface of the paper. "I guess." The 4-year-old still didn't sound convinced. "Can we try another picture? And I'll get it right this time." The goddess of the hearth nodded. "Sure, honey. Which one would you like to try?" She turned the pages of the book, flicking through as she searched for an animal they hadn't colored in yet. "Shall we try and color the lion? Or maybe we could color the alligator?" The little girl shook her head. "Nah." The sound came out like a sheep bleating, forcing Hestia to bite her lip from busting out a loud laugh. Thalia's blue eyes looked through each page for a couple of moments at a time before finally finding one that caught her attention. "This one." Hestia looked down at the page and smiled. "A fox." "Yeah. It looks like Mr. Naruto." The goddess giggled again. Leave it to a child to point out something so funny and ironic. "I guess you're right. I think it's the whiskers," she whispered, tapping the page with her finger. "Yeah." Thalia whispered back, nodding enthusiastically. She fell into a fit of giggles, joining her aunt and laughing together. "What are you two giggling about?" they heard, looking up from the table to find Naruto standing next to their table. Their table sat in the corner of the room, closest to the counter at the front of the house. The fox's den was half filled on a Saturday, though the blonde found himself busy beyond words earlier in the day. It was only in the last hour where things started to calm down. Thalia and Hestia arrived 30 minutes ago, bringing with them a coloring book and a pack of crayons Hestia had bought for her niece a few days ago. By the look on the little girl's face, she was eager to make a start on her new book, though she made sure to give Naruto a big hug when they walked in and cheerily greeted him. The action warmed his heart and made his smile widen before escorting them to a free table. She was settling in nicely. "Nothing. Just girl stuff," Hestia replied and was quickly mimicked by her niece. "Yeah, girl stuff. Mr. Naruto being nosy." "He is, isn't he, Thalia?" Hestia replied, giggling at Thalia's words. Naruto was right about her niece. She was very cheeky but in an endearing way. "Duh." Chuckling, Naruto didn't press. Instead, he lowered the tray and rested it on the table. "All right, be that way. I've got your lunch for you, so pack your crayons away. You can draw some more after you've finished." It surprised him how quickly he fell back into parent mode. Sure, there was some rust. It was more than 5 centuries since he last cared for a little one. With Gunilla, the little girl tested him for the first couple of weeks. It was the child's way of seeing if this new adult in their life was going to stick around, or if they were going to turn tail and run away. It was the same process when a divorced, or widowed parent brought home their new significant other. Oh, the daughter of Thor has tested him. His patience. His limits. His sanity. After weeks of acting like a tiny tyrant, something finally clicked in their relationship. When she realized he wasn't going anywhere and he was there to stay, the walls disappeared, and a very different little girl was left standing before him. Thalia didn't need to be told twice. She packed her crayons into a neat pile and closed her coloring book. Settling her plate in front of her, Thalia licked her lips. Yummy. Well, I hope so. 1 plate of French toast with strawberries and syrup. Next, he placed a small cup of darkish yellow liquid to the side, and 1 freshly squeezed glass of apple juice. Enjoy, Thalia. The little girl's eyes lit up. She picked up her cutlery but stopped when Hestia gently tapped her hand. What do you say? A big smile lit up Thalia's face. Thank you, Mr. Naruto. You're very welcome, Thalia. He ruffled the top of her head and felt her lean into his touch. You know, you don't always have to call me Mr. Naruto. Just Naruto will be fine. Okay, Mr. Naruto. The blonde chuckled again and left the little girl to eat her lunch. It was a title he was probably going to be stuck with for a while, though he didn't mind. Grabbing the other plate, he settled it down in front of Hestia, who was having French toast and strawberries as well, with the addition of dices of banana. The portion on the plate was larger than Thalia's, and cut to perfection. Here's your lunch, and here's your drink. A mug of freshly brewed tea took up the spot next to her plate. The distinct scent of strawberry and vanilla wafted through the air, making Hestia hum in delight. Smells delicious. British origin. Japanese. No one makes tea like the East. Naruto replied, how's your morning been? It was good, thank you. We went to the mall, and I'm pleased to say Thalia's wardrobe is now full. You won't have to worry about clothes or shoes for a while. Hestia replied, you owe me one. I know. I won't forget. Naruto said back. He'd asked Hestia to help with the wardrobe situation since he was none the wiser on what would be best to get someone like Thalia in modern society. He hadn't shopped for clothing for a little girl since Himawari was a little girl, and even then, Hinata had been the one with the eye for such things. Buying clothes for boys was one thing, but buying for a girl wasn't an entirely different matter. Not wanting to get the wardrobe situation wrong, he left it in Hestia's capable hands. This going to be an adjustment, that's for sure. Hestia smiled, taking a bite of her lunch. I wouldn't worry. As you said, you're rusty, but that rust will wear off eventually. Next time, you can come with us, and I'll show you some pointers. Thanks. I'll be taking you up on that. And when does her new wardrobe arrive? Tomorrow. The guy at the store said it'll arrive in 3 days, and that was 2 days ago. He didn't give me a specific time except that it will be in the morning. Just means I'll have to leave. He leaned in so Thalia didn't hear him, a clone to sign the paperwork and help get it up the stairs. Since Thalia was now living with Naruto permanently, the blonde decided to turn the guest room she'd been staying into hers. The little girl had been excited at the prospect of having such a large room. It was twice as big as her previous one, and the bed was much bigger than her old one. Watching the way she would wriggle around in her sleep, her new bed could easily accommodate. They bought new covers and sheets for her, ones that were dark blue and white and comfortable to the point Thalia would fall asleep the moment her head touched the fabric. He quickly realized Thalia was the type of person who enjoyed having lots of pillows and added a few more for her to enjoy. While they were out, he left some clones behind to give the walls a new lick of paint. All 4 walls were painted light blue, similar to the sky on a sunny day. The carpet was the only part that remained the same. A toy chest had been added, with a few welcoming gifts from himself and Hestia, while a row of stuffed animals of different varieties adorned the top of the chest. Thus far, Thalia was in love with her new room. His reward had been the biggest hug the little girl could muster and continued to give him when she saw an opportunity. The last piece he added was a nightlight that shone star shapes on the walls. Last night, when he stopped by her room to check on her, he found her with her limbs spread out like an eagle, a goofy smile on her face as she sipped the night away. "I think you've got a customer trying to wave you over," Hestia told him, nodding over to a woman trying to get his attention from across the room. "So I do," he replied, "duty calls. Let me know if there's anything else you want for lunch, you two. I'll be back shortly." With that, he continued his day, leaving the aunt and niece duo to their lunch. "Okay." The reply from Thalia came out muffled, her mouth full of French toast. A slight look of admonishment came off the goddess of the hearth, who flicked her niece's ear. She was always a stickler for manners. She would do the same for her godly nephews and nieces whenever she caught them. Everyone knew to be on their best behavior when in the presence of the goddess of the hearth. "Don't speak when your mouth is full, Thalia. It's bad manners." Odesh, Thalia started to say, before getting cut off by the look on her aunt's face. The 4-year-old had enough sense to swallow her food first, before replying, "Okay, Auntie Hestia." "Good girl. What are we doing later, Auntie?" "I'm not sure. I don't have to go home until this evening, so we've got all afternoon." Hestia threw some ideas around, hoping it tickled the fancy of her niece. "We could go for a walk in Central Park. There's this lovely ice cream stand we could try if you're good. The weather is very nice today." Apollo must have been in a good mood, and the goddess could only imagine what had put him in one. Or better yet, who? "Can I have chocolate ice cream?" "Of course. I bet chocolate is your favorite, right?" "Duh. It's the best." Thalia said back, a moment away from taking another big bite of her French toast. "What's your favorite, Auntie Hestia?" "My favorite? Oh, well, I love vanilla." Her answer didn't sit well with Thalia, who made a face. "What's that face for, huh? What's wrong with vanilla?" "Vanilla's boring." "Boring?" she questioned, a smile tugging at her lips again. "Yup. It's the most boring ice cream in the whole world. Old people like vanilla." Hestia tried to contain her laughter, but couldn't hold it with her best efforts. Her niece said the funniest things, and she didn't even know it. Technically, she was older than all the mortals currently sat in the fox's den, along with the rest of the block. The only person older was Naruto, who was none the wiser to Thalia's little comment as he carried 2 plates of red velvet cake to an older gentleman and his wife. "Then what do you think I should get?" she asked, as her niece was the apparent expert in all things ice cream related. "Chocolate." "And what if I don't want chocolate?" Thalia pouted, her lips puckered as a thoughtful expression wove onto her face. She got cuter and cuter by the second. Gods, she was beginning to think like Aphrodite. Thalia would find herself wrapped up in the goddess of love's arms, being gushed over and spoiled with no end in sight. That wasn't to say Hestia hadn't spent the last few days doing just that on Thalia since her arrival into Naruto's life, but the most sensual immortal on Olympus had a habit for taking it too far. Thalia's bedroom would be overflowing with stuffed animals and all things cute and fluffy. The little girl would be decked out in nothing but pink dresses whether she liked them or not. "Strawberry. Strawberry." Hestia repeated, thinking over the choice. "Well, I do like strawberry. That's my second favorite." "Mine too." "Are you sure I can't have vanilla?" "Nope. Even if I say please." Thalia shook her head, forcing Hestia to let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, all right then. Have it your way." Thalia giggled, and Hestia soon found Thalia's arm wrapped around her waist. A pair of bright blue eyes stared up at her with a look of wonder. The hug was a surprise, but not unwelcome, and Hestia soon found herself reciprocating. Wrapping one arm around Thalia's shoulder, her hand came up and delicately wove her fingers through her dark locks. "This is nice," she heard Thalia whisper. "I like your hugs, Auntie Hestia." "Well, thank you, sweetie. I like your hugs too. Goodness, I've been getting so many hugs over the last couple of days. I feel spoiled." Hestia smiled and watched as Thalia's smile widened. Her niece was such a happy child. A demigod that was happy was a rare thing to see, even when they were this young. I love you, Auntie Hestia. The words flowed out of Thalia's mouth easily and would have caught her off guard if she hadn't heard it a few times today already. For Hestia, the last few days with her niece had felt most peculiar. Unlike Hera, Demeter, Poseidon, and Hades, Hestia's had perfect recollection of the moment Cronus swallowed her whole, forcing her to grow up deep within his stomach. To this day, she could still remember the abyss that was her father's throat, like a pit of despair and cruelty with no end. The screams of her mother when she realized what Cronus was doing haunted her to this day, sending chills across her body. The agony in Rhea's voice had been unbearable. Like something out of a nightmare come to life. She could only imagine what her mother had felt at that moment. To this day, Rhea wouldn't talk about it. The pain was always there. Her husband's greatest betrayals. The moment the man she chose to commit herself with showed his true colors. She had a lot of time to think about the life she wanted to have if she ever escaped her father's stomach. She didn't want to experience the same agony her mother felt. She didn't want to feel the loss of a child and watch as they were ripped away by someone who was supposed to love them. If Hera and Demeter wanted to create life from their bodies, then she would help them through it as an older sister should. However, that choice was not one she wanted for herself. She didn't have the maternal element inside her as they did, and that grew as centuries went by. She didn't want children. She didn't want a husband. She didn't want any of it. She chose to remain an eternal virgin because she saw no value in having those elements in her life. She didn't view herself as maternal, nor did she want a husband to commit herself to. She was happy to be nothing more than a daughter. A sister. An auntie. A friend. She was content with the life she created for herself. She saw no need to add anything new to her life. And then Naruto stepped back into her life, bringing with her this little ball of energy that captured her heart near instantaneously. Thalia was like a breath of fresh air. For someone immortal, the days, months, and years started to feel the same. It became repetitive. Even Hestia found herself growing bored in recent years. Naruto was her saving grace during her many visits and never failed to liven everything around him. Thalia, she felt, was the same way. They were like two peas in a pod meant to find one another. Love you too, sweetie. Later that evening. Okay, let me see those teeth, Naruto asked, standing in the bathroom opposite Thalia's room. Said little girl was standing on a small red pedestal so she could reach the mirror and watch as she brushed her teeth. No child, no matter what age they were, enjoyed brushing their teeth. It seemed to be universal, no matter what era. Kids just found it to be the biggest chore, second only to tidying their room. Good dental hygiene was key, and no one liked the result of not taking care of your teeth. He would rather be used as a training dummy for students at the Ninja Academy than go to the dentist. Tooth pain was one of the worst sensations imaginable, and if there was one thing he was going to teach Thalia while she was under his roof, it was to take good care of her pearly whites. Thalia opened her mouth wide in an exaggerated manner. The daughter of Zeus was dressed ready for bed, wearing a set of grey pajamas with a happy-looking cloud on the front, courtesy of Hestia. She scrunched her face at the idea of anything pink. Any piece of clothing Hestia picked out that had a shred of pink on them, Thalia immediately shook her head. The 4-year-old didn't like the color one bit. It was a good thing she wasn't a daughter of the goddess of love. Such a mindset on the color pink was almost illegal for a child of the goddess of love. Naruto took a brief look, wearing an exaggerated expression before nodding happily. He was about to ruffle her hair but stopped himself. He finished combing her hair minutes earlier after drying her off from her bath. All right, let's head to bed. Nodding, the little girl jumped off the stool and bolted for her bed. The bed was massive and far bigger than anything a girl her age would be sleeping in. Thalia thought it was the comfiest bed in the world. Following after her, he arrived in her room as Thalia was jumping under the covers, watching as she warmed up the bed. Her face popped up from the top of the duvet and promptly began cocooning herself within the soft sheets. The blonde shook his head and came to sit down on the edge of the bed. A side lamp sat on a small table to the left of the bed, bathing a healthy glow across the room. So, Naruto asked, looking down at Thalia with a fond gaze, which companion will be sleeping with you tonight? Across the room sitting opposite the bed was a line of stuffed animals facing the bed, varying in sizes on top of a toy box. Though Hestia had shopped for clothes, Naruto had taken a brief break from running the fox's den, leaving it in the capable hands of his clones, to get a couple of stuffed toys for Thalia. By a couple, he meant a dozen. He may have gone a little overboard. Thalia put her hands up in the air. Henry. I want Henry. What the magic word? He gave her a knowing look that Thalia was quickly beginning to recognize after a couple of days. Please see. Smiling, he crossed the room and picked up Henry, a purple elephant that sat in the middle of the toy box. Why Thalia dubbed the elephant Henry was anyone's guess. However, the daughter of Zeus had fallen in love with the stuffed toy the moment her eyes met his sewn-buttoned ones. She always took his to bed with her and was seldom without him when they were at home. The only rule was that Henry had to remain at home. He didn't want the stuffed toy to end up lost like so many other stuffed animals. You know, your other stuffed animals are going to get jealous if you keep picking Henry. What about Seymour? Seymour was a green eagle, placed at the end of the row. Where Thalia came up with these names? They wished they knew. Hestia had been there for that one and was forced to hide her face in her hands from how hard she was cracking up. Of all the names Thalia could have picked for her father's sacred animal. Thalia shook her tired head. He's the lookout. The lookout? Yeah, he keeps everyone safe. Naruto raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Mr. Naruto. Thalia said, with Henry comfortably sat in her arms, when's Auntie Hestia coming back? A yawn broke out from the little girl, and he watched her eyes already beginning to fall heavy with sleep. Not for a couple of days. Auntie Hestia has some odd jobs she needs to get out of the way back home. Oh, Thalia replied, leaning on her side with her chin resting on Henry's head, what kinda jobs? Can I help? A hand reached out and gently patted her shoulder, just grown-up jobs. You know, like I do at the cafe. Your Auntie Hestia is a chef just like I am, and there are lots of people that love her cooking. They love it so much they line up in the streets just to get a bite. Really? She asked, half in wonder and a half in exhaustion. Does she make yummier snacks than you do? The blonde released a low chuckle. She likes to think she does. Was all he said with a wink. Whether his words reached Thalia, he didn't know. The daughter of Zeus was asleep in seconds, her body steadily arsing and falling with the bed covers. Chuckling, he quietly stood up and tiptoed out of the room, flicking on the night light as he left. Making his way into his bedroom down the hall, he closed his door with a delicate thud. Taking a deep breath, his soft blue eyes grew serious. Stopping at his wardrobe, he opened the doors and knelt on one knee. Running a hand over the smooth bottom, he knocked twice on the wood and watched as the surface propped up, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Prying the top off and setting it beside him, he reached and pulled a familiar pair of uniquely designed chakra blades. The same ones formerly owned by the chain-smoking Jonin that was taken from their world far too soon. The weapons had last been in the care of Mirai Sarutobi when they fell into his possession. Somehow, the chakra blades survived the destruction caused by the Great Shift, the day everyone he knew and loved was taken from him in an instant. It took a year of searching through the debris of his old home before he came across them by chance. The blades were one of the few items he kept with him, while others he found were locked and stored away in a safe location known only to him. Now that Thalia's asleep, let's deal with our guests, he thought, and before heading over to the window, quietly opening it so not to spook them, he jumped out and put his old shinobi skills to good use. Outside. Quiet, you fool. Are you trying to scare our meal away? Kelly screeched, her forked tongue darting in and out of her mouth as she glared at her underling and fellow impausa. I'm trying, but you said not to fly. My hoof isn't meant for traveling across the top of a tiled roof. Tammy hissed in reply, trying failing to keep her balance as the pair neared their target. The impausa, who were servants and creations of the goddess Hecate, had been traversing through the West District of Manhattan when the most delicious smell wafted up their nose. The scent was like a divine hammer knocking their senses time after time and pulled them like a magnet attracting metal. How long had it been since a demigod with such a delectable scent had crossed their paths? 50 years? 60? They weren't sure, but they both agreed it had been far too long. Try as they might, the pair had tried to resist temptation. The scent, however, overwhelmed their senses quicker than either could think. A scent this strong could only belong to a child of the elder gods, specifically, one of the big three. Even monsters such as they had heard that a child of the Olympian king and sky god had come into existence, though neither imagined they would cross paths with the child under the nose of Mount Olympus. It was unwise to insult an elder Olympian like Zeus. But the scent of his daughter. The girl was mouth-watering. It was just too sweet to ignore. The girl was unassuming, and being so young meant she had no idea of the power and potential she held. It would be easy picking, and the blonde adult they saw walking her home would pose little to no threat. It was an easy meal, and one too good to pass up. The only issue they would face was who got the larger share of their prize, and who got the scraps. Monsters didn't like to share over their kill, especially when it came to demigods. Between the two of them, Kelly often ended up the victor between the pair of Impausa and was confident Tammy would submit to her. She was the more vicious of their kind, and would show a level of brutality in her kills that left some wonder if she was the Nemean lion in disguise. "I haven't had a demigod in months," Kelly muttered, her long forkish tongue flicking between her lips, "not since the daughter of Hermes in New Jersey, though her scent wasn't half as delectable as this one." She approached the side of the building and went down onto all fours, her teeth making a loud chattering sound in anticipation. Her slitted eyes hungered for her prey. Steadily she peered over the side of the house with the intention of climbing along the exterior walls and climb inside through one of the many windows. The air in Manhattan was warm, and with a little bit of luck, a window would be open. A small gust of wind blew across the rooftop. One of her hands came up and pushed the hair out of her face. "Now, let's see if dash." Swish. Abruptly, Kelly's voice cut off. "Kelly?" Tammy asked, making her way over to her fellow monster. Leaning in, a strangled gasp broke the eerie silence on the rooftop with the backdrop of the city coming to life. Peering over the ledge, the Impausa turned her head and looked at her self-appointed leader. Her face was a mask of surprise, her slitted eyes wide and her mouth open wide. "What gives? What is it?" She shook her shoulder and was forced to throw herself back while letting out a screech. The moment Kelly's body shook, Tammy watched in horror as the older monster's head rolled off her shoulders and descended to the pavement below. As the head flew through the air, gold dust took over the form of the head, until slowly, it was gone with the wind. Kelly's body fell onto the top of the roof, her arm hanging over the tiles of the roof until it too was reduced to nothing but gold dust. Reduced to one, the remaining monster scrambled away from the side of the roof. Her eyes were darting from side to side, looking in every corner, though she didn't dare look over the side of the roof. Whatever had caught them unaware and killed Kelly, Tammy doubted it would leave with one of them dead and spare the other. What was it? She couldn't smell another demigod nearby, nor was there another monster in close proximity to them. To catch Kelly unaware, who begrudgingly she would admit was one of the stronger members of their kind, spoke volumes of their ability. Standing back up, the hairs on the back of Tammy's neck stood on end. Something was watching her. Something was behind her. She swallowed thickly, gradually turning her head to look behind. A dark figure stood there. Their front was shrouded, but Tammy could make out the figure was male. Cold blue eyes stared at her with the promise of death. She idly noticed two shapes in his hands reminiscent of a pair of blades, though the shape was bizarre and unlike anything she recognized. A low whine left her throat. One that was beneath any monster like her to let slip. She wasn't stupid. She could sense the dangerous aura around the man. Her breath hitched in her throat, and in a split second, her wings spread out to their full reach and jumped into the air. She needed to fly away and never look back. It all happened so quickly that Tammy wished she hadn't turned away. She got a foot off the ground when something sharp pierced through the center of her back and exited through the middle of her chest. The breath couldn't leave her body as her form convulsed, and fell back to the ground with a low thud. Across from her, a blade with bluish energy flicking around the curved metal impacted the building across the road, spiderweb cracks from the force of the impact spreading across the stone and metal. Darkness quickly took over her vision and the last thing she could see was the cold blue eyes looking down at her as the figure appeared next to her in a flash of movement. He swung down. Gold dust scattered with the wind, leaving no trace that either monster was on the roof. That's it for part 6. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.